The constitutional crisis that we're all currently living through is escalating, according to some legal experts, because of the claims that Trump's Department of Justice is making in courts to defend their defiance of judges. So to get you up to speed, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 a couple of weeks ago to deport hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants to a prison in El Salvador. Now, this archaic law, in theory, is only supposed to be used during times of war. And we're not at war. But in order to activate his authority under this law, Trump lied and said that we're at war with the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which is a stretch since there's just 300 or so of them in the country. Nonetheless, that's what he did. And since he claims we're at war, well, it's appropriate, therefore, to cite that particular law as a justification for these particular expulsions of quote-unquote gang members. Now, come to find out, many of the 200-plus people that he deported without due process were not gang members. One of them was a gay makeup artist who had a tattoo that they assumed was gang-related when it wasn't. Another was a legal refugee that passed a full background check who was also profiled because of his tattoos. And another was a professional soccer player who was legally seeking asylum in America after he was tortured by the Maduro regime. But putting aside that fact for a moment, a district court judge named James Boasberg blocked their deportations, but the White House defied him, saying that they didn't have to comply with his directive since the plane was already in the sky when he made that order. Now, since this happened, Republicans have waged an all-out war against this judge. Trump attacked him on Truth Social and called for him to be impeached, leading to a rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts, whose court, by the way, granted this guy near absolute immunity not that long ago. Furthermore, Republican senators like Josh Hawley and Mike Lee announced legislation to prohibit judges altogether from issuing nationwide injunctions, and Speaker Mike Johnson even floated the idea of eliminating federal courts altogether, which is something that hasn't been done since 1982. So they're willing to take extreme steps to ensure that Trump has no checks on his authority. And in courts, the Department of Justice is now arguing that Trump basically does have unlimited power, and he doesn't have to comply with judges at all. As Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern explains, on Monday, Donald Trump's Department of Justice made two arguments in two different courts that, taken together, amount to a legal claim of near-dictatorial power by Trump. First, it informed a federal appeals court that the president has the authority to declare any non-citizens to be alien enemies and to deport them to a foreign prison where they will be forced to perform hard labor indefinitely without notice, a hearing, or any meaningful opportunity to prove their innocence. Second, it refused to provide U.S. District Judge James Boasberg with details of these mass deportation operations, even in a closed courtroom, even under seal, insisting that Boasberg's authority must yield to the, quote, mandate of the electorate. In other words, Trump's electoral victory grants him an absolute right to conduct these deportations, rendering them unreviewable by the judiciary. This is insane. This is not a constitutional argument, and it barely pretends to be. It is more akin to an argument from an archaic notion of the divine rights of kings. Trump is our ruler, it holds, such that anything he does is intrinsically lawful. In a constitutional democracy, of course, the president is not a sovereign whose authority is above question or limitation. Even the most extreme versions of presidential powers have limits of some kind, but this administration is relentlessly pushing a theory of executive power to dangerous new extremes, smearing lower courts that stand in its way. So understand that they're not even trying to make a legal or constitutional argument for this power that they're saying Trump supposedly has. They're basically saying, well, he won the election, so he can do what he wants, deal with it. And it's not necessarily surprising, since Trump himself tweeted about how he who saves his country isn't violating any laws or something like that. And also, the official White House Twitter account literally tweeted an image of him wearing a crown and calling him a king. So none of this is surprising, but this is them in court under oath saying, yeah, we're not just memeing, we're not just shitposting, we're saying he basically is a king for all intents and purposes. And since he thinks he's a king, of course, that also means that he doesn't have to follow the rule of law and he doesn't have to obey judges. That is very, very serious. Now, he's not following the rule of law, and they haven't been giving people due process, in particular with regard to these deportations. And the border czar, Tom Homan, basically admitted on national television, yeah, we don't think that these immigrants have due process rights.
What we've heard from lawyers representing some of these people is that they deny that they're members of this gang. Or either, Tren de Aragua or MS-13. Do they get a chance to prove that before you take them out of the country and put them in to a notorious prison in a country that they're not even from? I mean, do they have any due process at all?
Look, due process. What was Lake and Ronnie's due process?
In other words, no, they don't have due process. And I get that this administration is throwing a lot of shit at us, so it's difficult to keep track of every little thing that they do. But this is extremely serious. Like, for them to say that on national television and to argue in court that they don't have to give these people due process, that is significant. If you don't have due process, you cannot have a functioning legal system. The entire purpose of courts is to give the accused the ability to defend themselves in court. And without that, the entire legal system cannot exist. It is the bottom Jenga block that when you pull it out, the entire tower comes tumbling down. And to demonstrate how important due process is, this country even gave Nazis due process. And one judge made that point during one of these hearings. Lithwick and Stern continue. During oral arguments under questioning from Judge Patricia Millett, the full scope of the Justice Department's arguments grew chillingly clear. Drew Ensign, the mid-level DOJ attorney leading this case, insisted that the administration had complied with the Constitution when it accused over 200 migrants of gang membership and expelled them to an El Salvador prison in a matter of hours with no opportunity to contest their guilt or removal. Millett sounded shocked. Quote, "There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people," she told Ensign. "Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act." She's right. Although the chief Supreme Court precedent cited by the government in support of its position allowed for the removal of Germans during and after World War II, those individuals received a hearing at which the government had to show that they were in fact Nazis. The Venezuelan migrants subject to Trump's order, by contrast, received nothing of the sort. Quote, "If the government says we don't have to give process for that," Millett continued, "y'all could have picked me up on Saturday and thrown me on a plane thinking I'm a member of Tren de Aragua and given me no chance to protest it." Ensign had no good answer except to insist that each migrant once targeted for removal could somehow have filed individual objections in the hours before they were expelled to El Salvador. But at that point, according to the government, they have no further recourse in court. As Millett pointed out, it is absurd to imagine that these migrants, many of whom do not speak English, could hire a lawyer and file a petition in that fleeting period of time, let alone secure a hearing. And she's right. The time between Trump signing the Alien Enemies Act executive order and deporting these folks was hours. So how exactly were they supposed to defend themselves? The fact that they're making this claim is laughable, and they're not really even trying to make a good argument because, again, they don't think that they have to, since Trump basically has near-dictatorial powers. So this is them just putting up the window dressing to make it seem as if they're following the Constitution, when in actuality they're not. They're trying to make it seem as if they're still complying with the rule of the law, so that way the public doesn't freak out about this constitutional crisis that they created, but they are not following the rule of law. And if you look at authoritarian regimes around the world, a lack of due process is the hallmark of their flawed legal systems. Them not having to prove charges against people in courts gives the state basically a blank check to round up anyone for virtually any reason. I mean, at best, it leads to innocent people being detained arbitrarily for something that they didn't do. But at worst, it leads to critics of the regime being charged with random crimes and locked up because they criticized the government. This is actual dictator shit, and the fact that this administration is making this argument in court with its full chest is a very, very bad sign of what's to come. Their goal is to either turn the court system into a rubber stamp for this administration's abuses or just bypass it altogether. And on that latter note, Aaron Reichlin-Melnick of the American Immigration Council says that the Trump administration is seemingly going to use the Alien Enemies Act to bypass the Fourth Amendment altogether and just enter people's homes without warrants under the guise of pursuing members of Tren de Aragua. This is unironically Gestapo-like shit. And if you demand due process that you're entitled to as a resident, the administration is going to try to punish you for making that request. Because Melnick also points out that a doctoral student who is suing the Trump administration over his executive order targeting pro-Palestinian students is being asked to turn himself into ICE for deportation. So they are now retaliating against people seeking justice and asking for due process. But on top of that, they're also taking aim at attorneys fighting for justice. And I say that because, as the New York Times explains, Trump signed a new decree that lets the Department of Homeland Security sanction attorneys for filing what they call, quote, frivolous, unreasonable, and vexatious lawsuits against the federal government. And they are particularly taking aim at immigration attorneys under the pretense of, quote, preventing abuse abuses of the legal system. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're an attorney or a judge. If you try to get in the way of their mass deportations, there will be hell to pay. You'll be sanctioned if you're an attorney, possibly impeached if you're a judge. At a minimum, you'll experience extreme harassment. And if need be, they'll just abolish federal courts if you don't let them do what they want to do. This is a full-blown assault on our entire legal system. And keep in mind, it's not just Donald Trump. He's not an aberration here. It's the entire Republican Party apparatus who is assisting him in his assault on the judiciary. Listen, our government, our entire system of governance has not faced a threat this significant since the Civil War. But unlike the Civil War, the good guys don't seem to be winning this time. The bad guys are winning. So pay close attention to this ongoing constitutional crisis, because the outcome of this battle in the courts will quite literally determine whether or not America will remain a democracy.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.